Hello.
Hello, Ankuradi. Yes.
Hi, Antaradi.
I'm so glad you were able to join. Hi, Prayag. Thank you for making it to
Hi.
the meeting.
Hi,
We
hi.
all of us are waiting impatiently. It will be a great session.
Yes,
Medha.
we're just waiting for the speakers to
Yeah.
join us. They'll be
Sure.
here
Sure.
any moment.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Good evening, Trinadi. We can see you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, I see so many people. All right.
Yes,
Yeah.
we had an
Hi.
Hello,
overwhelming
Trinadi.
response.
Hi.
My
Hi.
apologies.
Hi. Good to see everyone. Yes. Hi, Pradosh.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
I'm going to turn my mic off for now because
Yes,
he
sure.
wants it.
We're just waiting for Niladvita to
Yeah.
join us.
Yeah.
Person you are
Medha, I think Father Dean wants to attend the meeting. I think for some reason the IT team forgot to send him the link. So,
Father, I think he has
yeah.
received a link. I have sent him the link. But Priya, could you please
Yeah,
just
I've already
resend it?
resent it. Yeah, and
Right, right. Thank you.
I've let him know by WhatsApp as well.
So, just give me a moment. I think Father Vice Chancellor will be with us shortly. Hello, Nirajita. Good evening.
Good evening, Niladvita. Good to see you.
So good to see you. Yes.
Good evening, Iladvita. Welcome back.
Yeah, to home. Niladvita is muted, I think.
You have to unmute yourself,
নীলাদ্রিতা
Niladvita.
শুনতে পাচ্ছি না।
Unmute. Yes.
এখনো
Hello,
মিউট আছে।
Niladri.
Yeah, now it's unmuted.
Yeah, I know. So basically, I have, this is a new laptop, but the new laptop has it's probably got some kind of an identity crisis. It is a new laptop that likes to think of itself as an old laptop, which means that the new laptop has decided that it is going to act like a very old laptop. So it takes about 5 minutes for any command to register. So the laptop is a little hard of hearing, like
I think he just
Yeah, I think
got disconnected.
he got disconnected. So, Father will be joining us in exactly 2 minutes. I have been informed by the IT department.
Yes, Medha, are you ready?
Yes, Father, we are ready.
If you're ready, you can start.
May I have your permission to begin the program, Father?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. A very good evening to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, respected deans, guests, faculty members, and my dear students. Welcome to this webinar organized by the Women and Gender Development Cell of St. Xaviers University in collaboration with IQAC on gender, law, and society. Thank you for waiting so patiently. And without further delay, I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor and Chairperson of the Women and Gender Development Cell, Reverend Father Dr. John Felix Raj, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Professor Medha. First of all, I want to congratulate the St. Xaviers University, Kolkata Women and Gender Cell, the professor in charge, Professor Medha Batra Chaudhary, and her team for organizing this webinar on a very relevant theme. The theme, gender, law, and society. It encourages us an interdisciplinary approach towards addressing the present problems. And we are fortunate that we have two renowned speakers, Dr. Niladri Chatterjee and Dr. Trina Banerjee. They have spent years working in this field and developing a critical discourse among students. On behalf of St. Xaviers University, I welcome them to this webinar and look forward to their views on this subject, and I'm sure their views will be very fruitful to our student community. The and creating men and women for others as social agents, as leaders of our country and at the global level. St. Xaviers University believes in the emancipatory ideals of St. Francis Xavier, who is the patron saint of the university. He lived just for 10 years in this country, in India, from 1542 to 1552. And he strongly condemned the rigid patriarchal dominance and Brahminical control. The protection of women's rights and liberties has been a subject of contention and remains relevant even today. There are attempts to discriminate and destabilize genuine efforts towards the creation of equal opportunities. The intervention of law and legal agencies in safeguarding the rights of women and other genders has raised concerns among members of the intelligentsia and civil society, with the statistics reporting a disturbing rise in cases of gender violence against women and hate crimes against LGBTQ community. I am happy that this webinar is being organized on such a relevant topic, And I'm sure our faculty community, our student community, and also our guests and friends will benefit from this. I look forward to a very fruitful session, and I'm sure this will benefit all of us. Once again, I congratulate the St. Xaviers University Women and Gender Cell. All the best. Have a good evening. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you,
For
Father.
your kind words
Thank you,
and
Father.
for setting the tone for the rest of the evening. Thank you. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our esteemed speakers for this webinar. Professor Niladri Chatterjee, Head of the English Department, Kolkata University, and Dr. Srina Banerjee, Assistant Professor, Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta. Professor Chatterjee specializes in queer, gender, and masculinity studies. He has years of experience teaching in this discipline and numerous publications in reputed academic journals and edited volumes. His recent book, The Scholar, which was published in 2016, has been widely acclaimed among readers. Dr. Srina Banerjee takes a special interest in gender performance, political theatre, post-colonial theatre, and South Asian history. She has taught at the Theatre and Performance Studies Department of the School of Arts and Aesthetics in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And her essays have been published in several edited volumes with international and national journals. The purpose of our discussion today is to explore the intersections of gender and law and its impact on specific communities and on society at large. We will begin with Professor Chatterjee's talk and then move on to Dr. Banerjee. The questions from the audience will be addressed at the end of the discussion. Professor Chatterjee, the stage is yours.
Right. Thank you so much. Thanks to the Department of English, St. Xaviers University, a place that I have come to regard perhaps as my home away from home, away from home. So I'm delighted to be back here again for probably the 100th time. It gives me great pleasure to see Trina after a very, very long time. I remember that I met Trina probably sometime in 2002. So in another 2 years, I will have known her for 20 years. So it's fantastic to see her. Of course, it's very nice to see many familiar faces. And good evening to everybody at St. Xaviers University, and indeed everybody who has participated from outside of St. Xaviers University. I can see some of them here. Before I begin, Medha, I would just want to ask you how much time should I allow myself so that I can time myself accordingly?
Roughly 30 minutes, Niladri, if it's okay.
Yeah, okay, so fantastic. So basically it's 5:03 now, so
Yeah.
sort of 5:33
Yeah,
round
sure.
about. Okay, perfect. Okay, so half an hour is good. Obviously, whenever we have a webinar or whenever there is a seminar or a conference that is planned, the topic is kept it's very difficult to sort of strike a balance between the specific and the general, because if it becomes too specific, then it alienates some people, but if it becomes too general, then it alienates some other people. So I think it's always a bit of a tightrope walk to hit upon a topic for a seminar that is going to sort of be both specific and general at the same time. And I think that is something which this particular webinar has, I think, managed to accomplish rather well. And but what I wish to talk about today is going to be something very specific. I decided that I was going to limit myself to something that is sort of almost chronologically specific. And now that Medha has told me that I've got 30 minutes, it actually helps me, because my discussion was going to be focused on something as specific as can be accommodated into 30 minutes. I wish to talk about one particular year. So the year that I choose to focus on is 2008. That is to say, about 12 years ago. And the reason why I wish to talk about that 1 year is because of something that is much more historically important in the case of LGBT studies in India the next year. So 2009 is when Section 377 is read down for the first time in the history of India, which is done by the Delhi High Court. This is on the 2nd of July 2009. But that is something that everybody knows. I would wish to focus much more on the year that precedes it. So 2008, I think, is rather interesting because throughout 2008, and to be very, very specific, from 19th of May 2008 all the way till 17th of November 2008, what we find is a remarkable drama that is unfolding in the front pages of newspapers. And this particular drama is one that sucks into itself questions of not only sexuality, which seems to be overtly there, but also gender, also of nationality, also of morality, also of health, and also of so various other things get into it. Of course, law being, of course, the overarching story which frames the entire drama that begins to unfold, as I said, from the 19th of May till the 17th of November. Now, before I what happens between these 2 days? What happens between the 19th of May and 17th of November is that after a lot of ping pong bowling of a public interest litigation foundation in 2001, after a lot of toing and froing, which I'll talk about very briefly, ultimately day-to-day hearings begin at the Delhi High Court on the reading down, as it were. Initially, it was the plea was to scrap Section 377, but of course, ultimately, it wasn't scrapped. As indeed, till date, it hasn't been scrapped. It has been read down. So therefore, the reading down of Section 377, the day-to-day hearings begin on the 19th of May. But to just fill you in as to what happens before the 19th of May, I think is rather important. So what is going on before that? Well, like I said, 2001 is when the public interest litigation is filed by NAS Foundation. And so what happens was that this particular public interest litigation, this is filed by NAS Foundation, and the whole premise of that public interest litigation is simply this. And I think this is where health and medicine also sort of get sucked into the whole framing of the public interest litigation. The plea is that Section 377 needs to be scrapped because its presence in the Indian Penal Code is impeding the work of those people who wish to spread awareness on HIV/AIDS. Now, that I think is what we really have to keep in mind. So it is interesting that homosexuality enters the public domain by riding, as it were, consciously or unconsciously piggyback on this kind of peculiar combination of sexuality and health, which is not a very new combination, the combination of sexuality and health. What is healthy sexuality? What is unhealthy sexuality? So that is something which we are all very, very familiar with. So therefore, traditionally, that is to say, the way in which homosexuality used to be public constructed is that it is unhealthy, is that it is something that only sick people, and we'll come to sickness part a little later, only sick people indulge in. So therefore, homosexuality in the public, in the heteronormative imagination, was already constructed as a kind of sickness. And it is ironical that when homosexuality enters the legal contention, in the field of legal contention, it is still the sickness that seems to be the predominant framing of homosexuality, because it is almost as though please decriminalize homosexuality, because if you don't do that, then we cannot reach people who are sick of AIDS, sick of HIV. Also, if you don't decriminalize homosexuality, then we can't reach out to those people who may be sick, who may fall sick. So therefore, in a very interesting way, reform of homophobic law is tied to sickness. And that kind of alignment of sickness with sexuality is something that I find rather extraordinary is beginning to happen. So that is the plea, is that medical intervention is being impeded by Section 377. Okay. Now, when this is initially submitted to the Delhi High Court, what the Delhi High Court does is that it actually throws the petition back in the face of the petitioners in 2004 and says, I'm sorry, this is all too disgusting. We don't want to have anything to do with this nonsense. Okay. So in 2004, it is thrown back in the face of the NAS Foundation. What does the NAS Foundation do? They send it to the Supreme Court. So they say, look, Delhi High Court has returned the public interest litigation. What do? We are coming to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, please don't play ping-pong ball with it, is extension. So it is only when the Supreme Court asks the Delhi High Court to take a serious view of it that finally, 7 years after the public interest litigation is submitted, the hearings start. So it is not. So let us therefore remember that the Delhi High Court was not exactly falling over itself to decriminalize homosexuality. Maybe that is something that we should remember. Is that initially Delhi High Court was absolutely not interested in having to do anything to do with Section 377. It is only when the Supreme Court forced its hand that Delhi High Court took it very seriously. Okay. Now that's just the preamble to what happens in 2008. What does the cultural scenario look like? I think that is also fairly interesting for us to keep in mind. What does India look like in 2008? Well, in 2007, for example, ILOGS, the LGBT Film Festival, starts in Calcutta. And those of you who are in the know, those of you are on my friends list, you may be aware, those of you who are who are on Instagram may be aware that the Dialogues Film Festival is actually starting from tomorrow. This year's festival is starting from tomorrow. This is just this is just a programming note. Now, what is happening, therefore, is in 2007, we have an LGBT film festival that is taking place in Calcutta. By 2007, by 2008, a course in queer studies is already being taught at Jadavpur University. Also in 2008, the MA syllabus at Delhi University is already offering a course called Literature and Gender, which is including queer theory. And the Geography Department of Delhi University is also inaugurating a course called Cultural Geography, in which LGBT identities are being addressed. So that is as far as the educational scenario is concerned. So there are universities that are gradually becoming at ease with the idea that maybe this is a course that can be taught. LGBT film festivals are being organized. And what is also happening is that there are several movies that are being released at this point. Now, the first film that I would want to mention, of course, the film by which most people actually mark 2008 is, of course, Tarun Mansukhani's film Dostana, which is much better known as the Karan Johar film, although it wasn't directed by Karan Johar. Karan Johar was simply the producer. But anyway, so towards the end, just before the Delhi High Court proceedings end, Dostana is released. So Dostana comes towards the end. Dostana is released on the 14th of November. But before that, what we have, and I think this is something which is interesting for us to note. At the beginning of the year, we have Irfan Khan, who is creating ripples because he has decided to take part in a short film directed by Meera Nair called Migration. Now, what is interesting is not that Irfan Khan chooses to play the role of a gay man, but what is interesting is the way in which the media deals with it. So I can't resist reading this out to you. This is one of the media reports, and this is what it says in the media. It says, everyone's wondering how Irfan Khan, one of the top actors today with international fame and acclaim, could agree to play a gay, pardon the poor grammar, to agree to play a gay in Meera Nair's Migration. So apparently everyone's wondering. Now, this sort of, this universal wonder regarding an actor playing a gay role is something that is coexisting along with actors who are coming out of their comfort zone and gradually playing the role of a gay man. Now, what is interesting is that that was 12 years ago. 12 years later, when we have, Made in Heaven, that is being screened on an OTT platform, there is also apparently questions regarding the sexuality of the actor who plays the gay man in the OTT series. So therefore, there is a certain kind of discomfort regarding the visual representation of male homosexuality, which does not appear to have gone away. I mean, one would have thought it would have gone away, but extraordinarily enough, it hasn't. So what we also have is that there is a way in which our perception of gender is changing, and in particular, our perception of the male body is changing. And if there is one cultural phenomenon that seems to mark the way in which masculinity changes in 2008, not only is it John Abraham emerging from the ocean like a Bond girl, but also what we have is Om Shanti Om, in which Shah Rukh Khan reveals his six-pack abs. Now, what this does is that therefore there is a certain kind of self-objectification of the male body that begins to happen in 2008, the way in which it had not happened before. So therefore, if those of us who are interested in masculinity studies, and by the way, Om Shanti Om and Shah Rukh Khan's six-pack abs have also been paid particular emphasis on a new book that has just come out by Michael Bass called Muscular India. Those of you who are interested can look that up. It's just been released. And in Muscular India, Michael Bass also certainly makes a note of the way in which Shah Rukh Khan's six-pack abs in Om Shanti Om sort of basically galvanized the middle-class urban Indian youth to basically self-objectify, to finally realize that, I need to have a sexy body. So therefore, what is really happening is that there is a way in which the male body is being accepted as one that can be objectified. That is the point that I'm trying to make. Is that the male body is being accepted as the body that can be objectified, which is very new, because till then, as you very well know, and it continues to happen, the body that seems to be objectified so much more with greater alacrity is, of course, the female body. Now, it is in this context also that there are some actors who are beginning to speak out. So, say, for example, somebody called Khalid Siddiqui is saying to the media that my first crush was Amir Khan. And so you have a male actor who in 2008 is confessing to his crush, which is on another male actor. So by the way, mind you that this is all happening in the English language media. So that is also something that we perhaps need to keep in mind, is that exactly what is the level of discussion regarding gender and sexuality in sort of regional language media. That is something that I have not been able to look at, and that is something that I wish to look at sometime in the future. But what I'm telling you is the way in which gender and sexuality basically played out in the English newspapers, because what I'm going to say today is gleaned from the news clippings from 2008, primarily from Hindustan Times, some from Telegraph, some from the Times of India. It is in this context that on the 19th of May, you have the Delhi High Court beginning its hearings. We've got Justices A.K. Sikri and J.R. Midha, who is beginning to hear the petition. And this is where I think the real drama begins, because the government of India is asked to clarify its stand on Section 377. Should it be read down? Should it be scrapped? Should it remain? And this is where this extraordinary kind of theater begins to be played out in public, where you have two ministries of the central government speaking the forked tongue. So therefore, you've got the health ministry, which is absolutely saying that homosexuality should be decriminalized. The health ministry, which is the health minister at that time is Anmubami Ramadas, who is saying that absolutely homosexuality should be decriminalized, Section 377 should be scrapped. But on the other hand, you've got the Home Minister, Shivraj Patil, who is saying that no, Section 377 should be retained. Not only is Shivraj Patil saying this, you also have the Law Minister, who is also agreeing with Shivraj Patil that indeed Section 377 should be retained. Now, this is what is so extraordinary, that this is a time when the government is being repeatedly asked by court to please clarify where you are, and the government constantly seems to say that a part of it seems to say that it should be criminalized, and the other part says that it should be decriminalized. Now, what we really therefore have is that we have Anbumani Ramadas, who actually says very, very clearly on 6th August, when he addresses an AIDS conference in Mexico City, he says Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes men who have sex with men, must go. Now, what is interesting over here is the total exclusion of women from the entire discourse. So you have the two judges, both male, sitting in the Delhi High Court, deciding on the sexual lives basically of other men. You've got one man who's saying that it should be decriminalized. You've got another man who's saying it should not be decriminalized. This is a very interesting sort of homosocial formation that we are seeing in a public sphere, where a group of men are getting to decide on the sexual life of another group of men. That is what we should note, because when we think about patriarchy, what we actually consider is that men are constantly sort of trying to regulate the sexual lives of women. And that is something that the history of that is very, very well documented. Sort of sexuality rights, reproductive rights, we know the whole story. But what I think this sort of dramatizes in a very clear way is that you've got a group of men who are deciding how other men should lead their sex lives. And that, I think, is very, very interesting for somebody like me who does masculinity studies, because what it proves once and for all is that men do not function as a political bloc. Men do not function as a political bloc. So therefore, what we see very clearly played out is that over here, you have a group of men who are actually saying what other group of men should or should not do in bed with other men. And it is this which I think is also very interestingly reflected in the way in which discussion begins to revolve around the order of nature, or that is to say the natural law. And this is where I'm again quoting from a news item which was published on the 25th of August. Remember, this is when the proceedings are already on. So you've got, every week or every few weeks, you've got people who are coming up to Delhi High Court and who are pronouncing on what they feel about Section 377. At this point, you have a newspaper column that says, that pronounces on what exactly is meant by order of nature or the natural law. Humans cannot run as fast as a cheetah, but if one day a human being can do so, it would not mean that a natural law has been violated, but that we were mistaken in assuming that such a law existed. So therefore, what is being clarified over here is that there is a certain basic problem in Section 377, in the wording of Section 377, because, of course, as you very well know, it says carnal intercourse against the order of nature. So then there is a question that is being raised on exactly what is meant by the order of nature. What is being said, basically, is that what you think of as the order of nature is what you think happens in nature, not necessarily what happens in nature. So therefore, the way in which patriarchy constructs nature, the way in which patriarchy presents nature to us in a way which is going to help patriarchy, that is something which is made very, very clear. I have had such long discussions with people who sort of believe that, chapter 9 of the biology textbook is science. And I go blue in the face trying to tell them that chapter 9 of biology textbook, the one regarding reproduction, is not science, it's patriarchy. So what you have in the last chapter, the one that, most of our school teachers had such problems teaching, they all developed cough, they all developed sore throat, they all developed a dry mouth when they came to the 9th chapter. Most of them basically very simple, go. So the way in which our teachers experienced a sense of, dry throat and dry mouth when they came to chapter 9 is indicative of the way in which patriarchy silences discussion of sexuality, and also, so therefore chapter 9 is not about biology, it's about it's about patriarchy. Because anyway, I mean, we can have questions regarding that. So those are the ways in which we have discussion happening in 2008, where the order of nature is being questioned. Exactly what kind of order are we talking about when we are talking about the order of nature? Now, of course, the law ministry gets involved in it as well. I love this part. You got to love the law ministry. So on the 29th of August, law ministry actually says that Section 377 should be retained because it is an effective deterrent against pedophiles and those with sick minds. Oh, I love that. So therefore, basically, it's a very good law and it should be retained because it is a deterrent to those with sick minds. So the way in which, I just wanted to read this out to reiterate the way in which, sickness does not actually leave the discussion at any point. It gets constantly evoked as if to say, but it is very interesting, isn't it, that homosexuality is supposed to be a physical activity, but it is being situated in the mind. So in order to be a homosexual, you need to have a sick mind in order to be a homosexual. So therefore, that is something which is being done. And also, what this means is that, when you are saying that some men have sick minds, what you are also doing is, I hope you understand, is that those men are being feminized. Now, let me just sort of tell you how that feminization happens. Anybody who has done, Feminism 101 will know that patriarchy is very, very quick to regard disobedient women as mad or as sick. Madness, of course, being sickness, right? So therefore, the way in which any woman who resists, any woman who protests, any woman who challenges is automatically branded as being mad or sick or both. So therefore, and of course, all women are born disabled, as you very well know, because women don't have that wonderful thing that men have between their legs. Poor you. So therefore, what this does is that all women are therefore born disabled. But if you accept your disability and keep quiet about it, patriarchy will love you. But if you start to scream and shout, then of course patriarchy is going to pronounce you mad and sick or both. So therefore, the sane mind is the heterosexual male mind. That is the sane mind. So any mind that is not heterosexual and male is automatically therefore the sick mind. Yeah. So therefore, there is a way in which illness is therefore being carried into psychology, and this is being called. So therefore, these people have sick minds. At this time comes one of my favorite kind of figures in 2008. This is an actor that many of us may not have even heard of. Some of us who are avid watchers of Bollywood may have had one or two glimpses of him. His name is Anuj Swahni. Now, Anuj Swahni is not a household name because he probably did about 1.5 films. But this is Anuj Swahni giving an interview in the Hindustan Times. And I love this. He says at one point, I've got no hang-ups about doing any kind of role. And this is the best part. He says, I am open to playing even a gay character. Isn't it nice? So he says that I'm even open to playing a gay character on screen as long as there is some justification. Yeah, I love that. I'm willing to play a gay character, but let there be some justification. Yeah. Well, presenting a gay character in a homophobic way can also be a patriarchal justification. I mean, what do you mean by justification? I can justify, my completely homophobic portrayal of a gay man by saying, "Ha, ye log to hote hi aise." So what exactly do you mean by justification? If it's in the script, it must be justified in some way, whether in a feminist way or in a patriarchal way. But what is interesting is the way in which he says, but I'm even open to playing a gay man because, playing a serial killer is not a problem. Playing a serial rapist is not a problem. Playing a drug addict is not a problem, right? Gay man, wow. That is tough. That is tough. Serial killer is okay. That I can do. So the idea seems to be, but you see, do you realize that what the message that is being sent out is that it is tough for me to play a gay man because, of course, I being a heterosexual man, some actor recently declared himself to be a straight heterosexual man, which I thought was a wonderful clarification because I think there may be something called a gay heterosexual. I'm sure those people exist, just as there are straight homosexual people. But he clarified it. He said, I'm a straight heterosexual man. So in case you missed the point, there I am. But this is where Anuj Swahni is basically saying that, just because it is so, the experience of being gay is so alien to me, that it is almost, it's a divide that is unbridgeable, but that is the divide that I'm willing to cross. Please give me a job. एक रोल दे दे बाबा, एक रोल दे दे भगवान के नाम पे, एक रोल दे दे. So therefore there is this sense in which he sort of says, कुछ भी कर लेंगे, गे भी कर लेंगे, दे दे role. So it is extraordinary how this how unconsciously homophobic these people are. These supposedly open-minded actors. So from there, so as long as there is justification, my dear Anuj Swahni is apparently perfectly happy to play a role. Now, this particular conversation continues until we come to a very, very important meeting that that happens on the 16th of October. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I realize I've got just 1 minute left. So I'll say this very, very quickly. What happens is on the 14th of October, 30 Rhodes scholars meet Manmohan Singh, who is the Prime Minister. So 30 Rhodes scholars meet Manmohan Singh and they basically tell him, please, do something about Section 377. This is a joke. Get rid of it as soon as possible. And, Rhodes scholars, they are extremely powerful people, apparently. But this particular group of Rhodes scholars, thank God for them, are so powerful that within 2 days of meeting the Rhodes scholars, our dear Prime Minister Manmohan Singh basically convenes a meeting at which he calls all the ministries and says, please make up your mind. What do you have to do? Enough of this sort of bickering amongst you. We need to have a united stand. What is that united stand going to be? So Shivraj Patil, of course, comes out against the decriminalization of homosexuality. H.R. Bharadwaj, who is the law minister, he's also against. The only person who is in favor of decriminalizing homosexuality remains Anbumani Ramadas, the health minister. And as a result of the meeting on the 17th of October, the government finally decides to make its stand very clear. No prizes for guessing, of course. Like all good governments, it decides that Section 377 is wonderful and should be retained. Hurrah. But however, the Delhi High Court, Delhi High Court by this time is absolutely losing its patience. So Delhi High Court tells the government that please don't think of homosexuality as a disease. And government returns by saying, oh, no, but sir, you don't understand. Homosexuality is a disease and is a most indecent behavior. অসভ্য কাজকর্ম অসভ্য so this is most indecent behavior sir এসব কাজ বাজে so what happens is on the 7th of November we finally have somebody who also speaks in favor of retention of Section 377. H.P. Sharma is representing the VHP, Vishwa Hindu Parishad leader, B.P. Singhal, who says, and this is, I love it when politicians express concern for the bodies of citizens of India. It's very sweet when politicians worry about the health of its citizens. I'm sure like our government has worried so much about the health of the migrant workers, right? Exactly. So in a similar way, we have B.P. Singhal, who is saying about homosexuality, bleeding heart. He says, the act itself results in grievous injuries and must not be encouraged. Oh, well, he's very, very concerned about how homosexuality can cause grievous injuries. So he has taken it upon himself to save the men of India from inflicting grievous injuries on themselves. The idea is that as long as you're inflicting grievous injuries on other people, I think that's acceptable. But if you're inflicting grievous injuries on yourself, that is very bad and should not be encouraged. So with that, the proceedings come to an end, and on the 17th of November is given as the last date for the submission of the arguments in writing. And 3 days before that, 14th of November, Dostana is released. Now, what happens then is that between the 17th of November and the 2nd of July, there is complete silence because the Delhi High Court reserves its verdict. And it is only on the 2nd of July that, of course, Delhi High Court comes out all guns blazing, firing rainbows in every single direction, basically saying that this particular this sort of obnoxious section has to be read down and homosexuality is decriminalized for the first time in 2009. To conclude, I'm simply going to say that what 2008 does in a very remarkable way is to say how, talk about gender is not just a talk about gender. Talk about gender somehow always seems to pull into its discussion issues of health, issues of sexuality, issues of morality, issues of nationality, issues of legality. So therefore, gender never has existed in isolation. And what we found in 2008 is a remarkably dramatic example of the way in which the patriarchy manages to make these connections between amongst gender, sexuality, race, health, nationality very, very clear. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Nilajita, for that wonderful talk. Without wasting time, we shall move ahead and invite Dr. Banerjee.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible to Medha? Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I'd like to start with thanking St. Xaviers University Department of English for inviting me. I was approached by one of my former students, which is always nice. Indrani is here. And then I spoke to Medha. It's good to be here. I see quite a few faces that are familiar. And of course, Niladri has been said 20 years that I know him in different contexts. And it's lovely to sort of see all of you. So I looked at the topic and I thought that there were several directions in which I could possibly take it. And I thought it might be interesting to actually go back to certain fundamentals of when we talk about the gender law in society, we are of course talking about another sort of huge ideological and infrastructure, which is the nation. Right, and when we're talking about the nation, when we're subject to the laws of nation, we're also talking about a unit called the citizen, right? So let us try to understand what maybe the relationship of gender to citizenship might be, and I do not think I can give you conclusions or sort of obvious answers today, but I do want to raise certain questions that might sort of spark certain trains of thought, which maybe you would like to follow up later. So I begin with a little paragraph from an essay that I teach in the Feminism and Social Sciences course. At the center. And this is actually a pretty old essay. It's by someone called Juliet Mitchell, who some of you might have heard of. She was a socialist feminist. And this particular essay is called Women, the Longest Revolution. And it came out in 1966 in the New Left Review. Right, and this is how Juliet Mitchell begins this particular essay. And the essay, when you read it, you'll see that it's basically a very, very engaged sort of account, as well as an argument about sort of the political left's engagement with questions of gender. So Mitchell goes back to Marx and Engels, sort of speaks about the various moments of, socialism in Europe, in various parts of the West, and how the gender question has been negotiated. But one of the points that she makes at the beginning of the essay is actually quite significant, and there would be ways in which this essay is perhaps dated today, but some of the things that she said still hold good. So she writes, the situation of women is different from that of any other social group. This is because they are not one of a number of isolated units, but half a totality, the human species. Women are essential and irreplaceable. They can therefore be exploited in the same way as other social groups can. They're fundamental to the human condition, yet in their economic, social, and political roles, they are marginal. It is precisely this combination, that of being fundamental and marginal at one and the same time, that has been fatal to them. This is interesting. They're both fundamental and marginal at the same time, and that particular condition has in fact been fatal. Within the world of men, their position is comparable to that of an oppressed minority, but they also exist outside the world of men. The one state justifies the other and precludes protest. In advanced industrial society, women's work is only marginal to the total economy. Yet it is through work that man changes natural conditions and there reduces society. Until there is a revolution in production, the labor situation will prescribe a women's situation within the world of men. But women are offered a universe of their own. They say, the family. Like woman herself, the family appears as a natural object, but it is actually a cultural creation. There is nothing inevitable about the form or role of the family any more than there is about the character or role of women. It is a function of ability to present these given social types as aspects of nature itself. Both can be exalted paradoxically as ideals. The true woman and the true family are images of peace and plenty. In actuality, they may both be sites of violence and despair. Right? So the notion that in fact something that is posited to us again and again as a natural unit, the family, the most commonsensical, and I mean, much of this actually continues with what Niladrida was saying, that in a sense, this what is this family? It is the heteronormative family. What is commonly imagined to be the structure of the family is in fact deeply heteronormative, heteropatriarchal, and this is seen as the natural unit. And there is once again another natural unit, an unit that we imagine as almost natural, but in fact is cultural and ideological, which is the nation. Right? And this is something that if you look at Benedict Anderson and Imagined Communities, you will see that this idea that it is actually an association, sort of that which is a sort of constructed a cultural association which tries to masquerade as something that is natural, that is a tie of blood, that you for 1,000 years you've belonged to this community. That's the notion, that this is this old civilization that has now taken the form of a state, right? So what is this state? What is this nation state? And who is the citizen subject to whom the law applies, right? So we have understood that constitutionally men and women and other genders are equal in the eyes of the law. And this equal person is somebody who we understand as the citizen subject. Think of that word unit. It is citizen hyphen subject. It's a hyphenated sort of a compound in a certain way. But the question is that compound stable? And does that compound apply equally to different categories of people? And we know that before the pandemic struck, there were nationwide protests around the rights of citizenship. Who belongs, who does not belong, who is an outsider, who is an intruder, who comes, with some kind of sort of natural right to this land, and who, in fact, in spite of being an insider for generations, is in fact an outsider. These questions have been very, very prominent. So here, it's important for us to understand how this notion of citizenship particularly affects women and therefore their legal rights. Now, let me give you a little bit of a sort of historical anecdote. So in 1935, there was, under Nehru's sort of presidentship, a committee that was put in place. It was called the Committee on the Status of Women. And this Committee on the Status of Women actually had many prominent members of the female members of the Congress Party, and many other prominent legal experts and civil society workers who were meant to produce a report which was finally called the Women's Role in Planned Economy. And this report was meant to be a sort of blueprint for what the female citizens' position would be in independent India, whenever that came to pass. And this was, in fact, a hugely radical report. So, women's role in planned economy, it actually, one of the major suggestions of that very long report was that women must be imagined as independent citizens of the nation. They must not be seen as having a mediated relationship to the nation state. That is, not as mothers, sisters, daughters, etc. So they were not part of a family unit and therefore a citizen, but independent citizens, right? They must be imagined as independent and autonomous entities who had a certain relationship to the nation state, right? And to this end, therefore, they must be imagined as independent economic agents, independent political agents, independent legal subjects, right? Okay. Now, Along with this, one of the, say, for example, one of the very, very radical suggestions of this report, something that you'll find unthinkable in today. This question is has been impossible to address historically, not just in India but in many parts of the world. There was, in fact, a suggestion, a very strong suggestion made by this report, that even women who did not, in fact, and remember Juliet Mitchell's formulation, who did not had not entered formally the productive sort of the workforce, should be remunerated within the family unit for the domestic labor that they put in. Think of this. This is 1935 in India, where it is being said that it does not matter whether women have independently the workforce, the work that they do at home is worthy of remuneration because it keeps the family unit going, and it therefore sees the family not as a natural unit, but a unit where labor is, in fact, given, where in fact it is also a unit of production. Now, this is very, very interesting. These questions have historically come up at various points within a sort of Marxist feminist thought, laid aside and raised again. So if you think of the 1920s socialist feminists in Russia, for example, Kolontai and other people, they're also raising these questions. The question what to do with this, domestic labor, the nursing of children, reproductive labor, right? All of these things that are seen as the natural qualities of women, things apparently women are sort of born with. If they're good women, if they fail to, then like Niladrida said, they are actually either insane, deviant, deficient in some way if they do not have maternal qualities. But the fact that maternal duties are in fact a certain kind of labor, which has a certain economic value, which actually allows the system of production to go on and is therefore a certain kind of social reproduction because it reproduces the labor force, right? This idea, in fact, has taken theoretically and especially practically a long time to gain credence, and it's still very, very difficult to sort of argue for this. But this suggestion is made in 1935. Now, if you actually, and a lot of this is now sort of once again coming back into the discourse of through what's called social reproduction theory. If you're interested, one of the major people working on this area from India is Tithi Bhattacharya. She's come up with, a reader on social reproduction theory, where the idea is that you basically try to understand. So this question actually becomes, if you think about it, much more critically important post-pandemic. Think about it. What we've gone through for the last 10 months, it's going to be a year soon, has actually shown us that all those jobs that we thought were critically important, CEOs of companies, executives, people who, politicians, for example, all of these people without whom you think that the nation state cannot function, have become less important than those people whose work is actually constantly seen as marginal. Nurses, caregivers, hygiene workers, right? All of these people whose work is actually devalued both at the institutional, systemic, as well as the domestic level. Who does this work in the home? Who does the major work of caregiving at home? It is still largely women or men who, by virtue of that role, are in fact feminized. Right? As soon as you begin to play that role of a caregiver, you're immediately feminized. The question, therefore, is not that women do care work better, but that care work is always already presumed to be something feminine. So if you are good at it, you must be, in some senses, less of a man. Weird catch-22 this is, right? But what is the point of it? What lies behind this? What do we gain in the economy by feminizing care work? We gain the effect of devaluing that work. You don't need to pay as much. Which is why, if you think about it, the wage divide between men and women the world over in the corporate sphere in various sectors is still pretty much a big reality, right? So it is not simply a question of whether that men and women are paid differently, but different kinds of work are in fact paid differently. Even that kind of work, which we now know is absolutely crucial for survival, is in fact feminized, so it can be devalued in the space of the economy, right? So one person, and I have a lot to say, which is why I'm probably rushing a bit, but you can come back at me with questions later. One of the very, very crucial books that actually in the last 2 or 3 years has changed the way I look at a lot of things is by an Italian feminist called Silvia Federici. She writes a book called Caliban and the Witch. And because you're in the English department, you know the reference. It is to the Tempest. Who's the witch in the Tempest? Sycorax never appears, right? She's kind of this invisible shadow behind this. And who is Sycorax? We know that Sycorax owns the island before Prospero, the colonizer, arrives, right? Sycorax is somebody who has access to a lot of traditional knowledge. She's a witch who Prospero manages to displace and enslaves her progeny, right? So in many ways, we know that Tempest in recent times it's very difficult to read the Tempest without looking at the history of colonialism, right? And we know at the time that Shakespeare is writing, the first sort of fantasy, fiction, real accounts from the colonies have actually started to come back to the colonial sort of center. So what Federici does is actually something that is incredibly radical. She in fact posits a critique of traditional Marxism and it's a historical reading of certain sort of economic processes by inserting the question of gender in a way that has not been done before. So she looks at the transition that Marx would also look at between feudalism and mercantile capitalism in medieval Europe and says that this account is great, but this account does not take a sort of into cognizance another hugely devastating thing that is going on in the European continent at this point of time, which are the witch hunts. Yeah, thousands of women are being burnt at the stake. Does this have anything to do with this huge historical economic transition? And she says yes. Who are these women who are being burnt as witches? These are the women who have a certain kind of control over autonomous economic production. They are women who actually hold the wisdom to holding together the commons, the collective land, which is now in the transition to a certain kind of capitalism. The idea of privatization is coming out. These are also women who have access to traditional medicinal knowledge, traditional reproductive knowledge, right? And until the labor that these women put into this kind of a collective economy is completely devalued, it would be impossible for capitalism to, in fact, establish its hold. I'm simplifying a very, very complicated argument. It's deeply rich. I really recommend that you read this book. But what I'm trying to say is that the history of capitalism is deeply implicated with the history of patriarchy, as we know it in the world today. So without the absolute decimation of these women, their autonomy, their access to the economy, their hold on the economy, and the value they actually put into the economy, capitalism would not have been able to establish this regime of public and private, right? And this public and private regime does two things. It pushes women back into the domestic sphere and then tells them that the work of the domestic sphere is valueless. It's love. It's nurture. It doesn't mean anything because the real work is being done by the men. So the first move is you tell them that you can't work outside the home. All that you do outside the home, whether it be practicing medicine, producing sort of candles in the home, small cottage industries, all of that is irrelevant because now we are moving into large-scale production and you're useless. So move into the houses. You don't have any control over small-scale cultivation, none of this. Move back into houses, and if you don't, you shall be actually accused of various kinds of immorality, sort of heresy, and be burnt at the stake. So it's at the pain of death that you're moved back into the house. And once you're moved back into the house, you're told that what you do in that space is absolutely worse in the economic sphere. It's without value. It might have some value in the affective sphere, in that you become good mothers and you're patted on the back for that, but nothing more than that. Right? Now, once this has happened, suddenly in the 19th century, 18th to the 19th century, we find with the Industrial Revolution and after the Industrial Revolution, we find suddenly the coming of women into the industrial workforce is announced with great fanfare. right? So women enter wage labor, which is already a kind of slavery, which capitalism has imposed on men. Women are given a small part in this slavery. And this, in fact, is often that allows for women, perhaps federally, perhaps not intentionally, a space in the workforce, and therefore makes way for certain kinds of freedoms. Federici says the trouble is that we don't go further back and see that this is the same forces in an earlier modality that pushed women back away from the workforce first, right? And then allowed them back in and announced that, look here. This entry of women into the workforce is exactly what Engels is talking about in his great treatise on women's freedom, the family, private property, etc., where he says that until women enter production, nothing is going to change, right? But for Federici, this history actually goes further back. Now, when you look at how, in fact, labor is valued and devalued in the modern world, how we look at feminization of labor, how we look at care work, you see that many of these ideas are so deeply embedded in us as common sense. What work is valuable? What work is boring and it requires no skill? What qualifies as love? A mother staying up night after night to feed an infant while the father thinks it fine to go to sleep because he has to go to work the next day while what she's doing is merely love, right? So this distinction, which we see as absolutely commonsensical, is in fact deeply rooted not just in patriarchy but also in capitalism, right? So once we begin to understand this, we see that this report. Now let's go back to the sort of the context of India. This report is presented in 1937. Nehru heads this committee, a committee on the status of women, and this is a radical report, right? And the idea is that when India is independent and the status of in independent India is sort of being planned, this report would serve as a certain kind of a template. Now we see, of course, another decade and more passes, and we have the first 2 5-year plans. And by this time, it's the same Nehru who is now the Prime Minister. The report is never again mentioned. We have absolutely zero mention of this report that was placed before Nehru 15, 20 years back. And the first 5-year plans, if how women's health is being spoken about, women's education is being spoken about, you'll again and again see that they are being clubbed together with the family unit. So women's education is important, genuinely important. Why? Because they are the mothers to the future citizens. The fact that they themselves are citizens, that they are in fact autonomous economic entities who either contribute to the sort of workforce outside the private sphere, or whose work within the private sphere is already sort of economically valuable. That idea is completely wiped out. I mean, it is there. You have various sort of, if you just think back on films, I mean, because Niladita was talking about films so much, the 50s and 60s, you'll see that there are, in fact, we begin to have portrayals of women working outside, middle class women working outside the home, joining the labor force. One important film that you can immediately think of is Mahanagar, right? Ray's Mahanagar. And there you remember that the whole film is really I mean, Ray is, of course, extremely subtle and, I mean, that's an understatement. He's extremely subtle and he's extremely incisive in his portrayal. But if you remember, the justification for Arati's going out to work is really the fact that her family is in dire financial straits. So it is as a shohod, as a wife to her husband, that she decides to go out. If it were not required, she would have stayed at home, right? And so you remember when Anil Chatterjee's character actually, finds that the financial crisis is over, he basically goes to Arati and says, well, now you don't need to work anymore. But the trouble is that by this time, this woman has got a taste of something that she had not had before. And what is that something? What is the one doesn't quite know what that something is, but you see that throughout the film, the question of women's labor is deeply foregrounded. You remember that conversation that Arati has in a cafe with her friend's husband, where she's saying that, well, I'm selling this washing machine, and this husband says, well, are you not going to let women do any work anymore? So the fact that these household appliances are making women useless, and therefore they're going to beauty parlors, painting their nails, and becoming absolutely. This goes back to Bonkim actually. Think of Charulata as well, Nobina and Prachina. That whole dichotomy. The woman who does no work, right? Um, so the this something that Aruti has got a taste of is actually the emblem of it somehow becomes Edith's lipstick. The lipstick is something Aruti does not need. She needs the job, she needs the salary, but the lipstick is excess. And that painted red lip of the middle class Bengali woman, that also has other references in Parashuram, that Koteshi Ittadi, all that. I mean, it appears to be really, really disturbing for the middle class man somehow. But the point is, that lipstick is Arati's little access to autonomy, something she does for herself, right? So, and that becomes the core of her husband's insecurity in a certain way, right? That she's slipping somewhere. She's no longer, So to come back to this, so the notion that the citizen subject. So there's this very important Iranian feminist called Afsane Najmabadi, who I often teach in Tanit, these texts from the 50s. These sort of anecdotes from the 50s, who actually writes at one point that women, having mothered the nation, were now relegated to the service of the state. So you are so far Mother India. You were that inspiring figure who allowed for sort of national liberation to sort of congeal around certain questions of heroism, masculinity, etc. And in the world where women now had access to independent citizenship, they became those who could serve the state, but in the best possible way by serving the family, right? Okay, it became impossible, even within constitutional structures, to imagine a woman as an autonomous legal entity, which is why I remember for a long time there are many implications of this. Rape law actually spoke of outraging the modesty of a woman. What was this modesty? The assumption that if you did not have modesty to start with, there was nothing that could be outraged. So then who was the modest woman? One who belonged to a certain family. Therefore, prolonged discussions on whether a sex worker could in fact be raped, because she did not have any modesty to start with. So therefore, and this now all makes sense, and you've seen these scenes numerable times, including sort of, films as late as Dohon. The notion that the woman who's on the in court for testifying about rape or sexual violence, how is the sexual history of that woman relevant? It is relevant because even if the law and letter has changed, that modesty bit has now been sort of, after much struggle, been removed. But the modesty is really a question about who do you belong to, whose property are you pure enough to have been outraged in the first place. So the modesty of the woman is also the modesty of the family, of the community, and of the nation. So therefore, if you actually look at something like the Justice Verma Committee sort of recommendations that we saw after the Nirbhaya case in 2012, 2013, you see that many recommendations went to the Justice Verma Committee, and some of them were quite progressive and they were accepted. But there were two issues on which the recommendations got stuck. One was the issue of marital rape, and the other was the question of AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and the sexual violence that took place in the the places where military law is in operation in the subcontinent. And in these two cases, in these two recommendations, the recognition of marital rape within the family and the recognition that, in fact, the nation state was capable of, perpetrating sexual violence. In these 2 points, the recommendations got stuck. So the family and the nation state, right? And the 2 great pillars of masculinity, the husband and the soldier, right? So could not, in fact, be perpetrators, right? So therefore, one then needs to begin to think very carefully about what really is at stake when we think of a woman as a citizen subject. And this citizen, this identity of a woman as a citizen subject, who has access to the protection of the law, is contingent, if not on paper, then socially, on numerous conditions. What kind of woman are you? Where do you belong? Do you have a family? Are you married? How many relationships have you had? All of this do not matter on paper. But the truth is that in the legal sphere and in the social sphere, you can't ever with any stability claim this identity. With even if you qualified for the NRC, you still would not be able to claim this identity with any kind of security or certainty. So I'll stop here. There's a lot more to say, but we'll maybe in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trinadi. Thank you very much for your talk. In conclusion, let me capitalize on the word love, which Trinadi happened to mention, and how love exercises an extraordinary power in destabilizing the autonomy of women, pulling them back into the domestic realm and really making them feel guilty for choosing career over family, and how it constantly seems to interfere with the rights of the woman citizen subject in the social sphere, as you very correctly pointed out. And getting back to Niyadrita, I suppose you would agree, this idea of queer love seems to constantly supersede discussions on sexuality, particularly in the newspaper you refer to, in which widely publicized the litigation around Section 377. There's constantly the repetition of the word queer love instead of sex, and just to completely ignore again the fact that homosexuality again is a broad social reality. To convert that into something as pure as love, as queer love. So thank you very much for your talk. We have a few questions which we shall plunge into. The first question is from Srijita Pathak from the English department. Her question is for Niladrida. Would you say that the patriarchal society attaches labels to people who they perceive as subversive or not normal? And Srijita asks that how does this labeling or stereotyping work?
No. I think patriarchy assigns labels to absolutely everybody. See, patriarchy. I don't know why you people have such a big problem with patriarchy. Patriarchy is lovely. Patriarchy is democratic. You see, patriarchy wants to oppress everyone. You people should stop complaining about patriarchy. Patriarchy is so democratic. And this is something which I think people just don't seem to understand. Patriarchy labels everyone in the sense that I've gone blue in the face, sort of basically saying that there is no such thing as biological sex. But that is really where it begins. When a child is born, I repeatedly ask, exactly what is the reason behind labeling that child as a male child or a female child? Because the moment you put that label of sex on the child, you are creating a lot of problems, innumerable amount of problems for the child in the future. So therefore, labeling begins. It isn't about just labeling so-called abnormal people. Labeling in itself is an act of control. And the best thing is that patriarchy. Where is patriarchy? Well, patriarchy is in our parents. Patriarchy, that is where it begins. Our parents sort of start the labeling, and once our parents start that labeling, it does not stop even after death. So therefore, the labeling becomes a mode of control. And it starts very innocuously with in America they call the gender reveal party. Well, I simply don't understand who gave the parents the right to reveal the gender of the child, because the last time I checked, when the child grows up into an adult, the child can reveal their own gender in their own sweet time. So the whole gender reveal party in itself is a very, very unconsciously violent act. But this is something which we simply don't recognize. So therefore, it isn't just about it isn't just about labeling those who are supposedly abnormal. Patriarchy exerts control through labeling. So that is something that we should probably keep in mind. But I mean, thank you for your question.
Right. Thank you, Niladrita. Our next question is from a faculty member. We have Professor Ratul Das from the law school who would like to ask you a question.
Thank you, Medha ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Chatterjee, especially for your lovely recounting of the socio-cultural context in which the Nas Foundation case was fought out. Now, one of the reasons you were making an observation as to why women were excluded from the judicial discourse. Now, one of the reasons is also found in the language of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, as I read it.
Yes.
The act it addresses is specifically its carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Now, the expression
Yes.
intercourse till date can only be interpreted as penetration of one's body by another by insertion of
Yes.
a bodily organ, or more specifically a
Yes.
penis, into a bodily
Yes.
orifice.
Yes.
This has been also sustained by omitting the word intercourse entirely in the POCSO. We do not find the word
Yes.
at all, which addresses insertion of non-bodily objects as sexual assault as well. Section 377 also evidences a dichotomy between sexual intercourse and carnal intercourse, where the former refers only to peno-vaginal intercourse. Now, any intercourse that does not involve the penetration of a penis into a vagina stands a point of deviation in the first place, so which must be either suppressed or, at best, as it stands today, be tolerated. My question borders around this area, this dichotomy. Interestingly, it leaves me wondering about the state's preoccupation with body-in-body penetration. While the state-aided hegemony has discouraged any sort of intimacy that challenges heteronormativity, I wonder what explains direct state sanction of body-in-body penetrative acts only. Has it something to do with a Freudian castration anxiety towards protecting the masculinity of the society as a whole, compared to its official indifference to intimacy among women against the order of the nature? Thank you.
Wow. I'm not sure I'm sort of ready. I think these are sort of important questions, but I'm not terribly sure if I'm prepared to. I need some time to work that answer out in my head. But I mean, thank you for your question, Professor Das. But I really need to think more about it before I hazard an answer. But I mean, something which is very clear from the way in which the proceedings of Section 377, the hearings happened, and the way in which even the judgment was framed. It seems to be very clear that sometimes law tries to be sort of anti-patriarchal. Sometimes law tries to be sort of generous and loving and sort of all embracing and inclusive. Law tries, let's give law credit for it. But I think what Medha was saying is that sometimes law, this is the problem with law, is that law loves us too much. And I think when the law loves us too much, I think that's where it becomes a real problem. Because in the 2018 verdict from the Supreme Court, as Medha points out, I genuinely did not understand why love had to be invoked in a judgment. I simply couldn't. It was about sex. Why couldn't sex stand for itself? Why did it have to be made respectable by attaching love to it? And because mentalizing sex, you're on a slippery slope to patriarchy again. You're basically saying sex cannot exist, as a freestanding entity. It has to be tied to love, because that's what makes it okay. So I think that it's very interesting how someday maybe I could talk about the difference between the 2009 Delhi High Court judgment and the 2018 Supreme Court judgment, and the way in which these two judgments seem to So it's very strange. I mean, they appear to be progressive, but there are certain elements in the Supreme Court verdict that unfortunately become regressive. And just very quickly, this again ties up with what Trina just said, because one of the most disturbing lines in that.
I'm afraid Niladrida has been logged out of the meeting. This may be a technical glitch. We shall wait for him to rejoin. In the meantime, there is a question for Trinadi. Professor Pradosh Bhattacharya from the English department would like to ask a question to Trinadi. Pradoshda, are you here in the meeting?
Yes. I'm there, Meta. Right. Thank you, Niladrida and Trinadi. As always, it's a pleasure to hear your inflections. As a part of that question was out of kind of certain excitement. The radioactive nature of your classes used to be, and so you have partially, to a great extent, answered. But I was still thinking about, the last part where you did say, which is very interesting and important, that despite something not being on paper, in practice, the idea of gender is contingent upon certain intersectional nodes of practice. So I was just thinking in terms of the international labor laws and international response to kind of a redress, to offer a redress, to seeming redress to the idea of gender and its implications within the idea of citizenship as well as labor. So the idea is that it seems like that the nation state, the modality of the nation state also seems to expand into the transnational framework, because I'm reminded of two conventions. One is the UN Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families, and the International Labour Organizations conventions. Both the conventions seem to offer, as Niladrida was saying, a progressive, apparently progressive redressal. But I'm kind of encouraged, again, from Trinadi's own classes, which I did attend, where in a different context, Trinadi was talking about, in the context of Philip Oslander's theory of liveness, that it seems always that there's a late entry of the capital and the capital logic to claim, the always already mediatized concept. So I was thinking of that same concept. Maybe the terms of redress even are axiomatically linked with a certain masculine framework of the migrant worker. And as you rightly said, that this separation of the domain, which is kind of inflicted upon by the social norms and then devalued, is also carried out in a transnational framework, which seems to be a sort of an international response towards labor, but it is I think it does carry a certain contingency of problematics of praxis. So your thoughts on that, or anything on that regard would.
Can I just say that I can see Niladrida is back? If he could, he was in the middle of a sentence. So if he could just finish what he was saying, I remember the questions. I'll come back with the answers. Niladri, would you want to finish what you were saying?
Right. So, yes, thank you, Trina. I just got disconnected. So this is just to say that sort of Chief Justice Malhotra, she's saying that history owes an apology to members of the LGBT community and to their families. What she's doing is she's removing family from any sense of blame. Family becomes, it is getting reproduced in the judgment as this safe, loving, nurturing space where LGBT people are perfectly happy, and all the brutality, all the oppression, all the torture comes from the outside, which of course we very well know is patently not true. That in most cases,
unfortunately, there seems to be a severe problem.
Okay.
The network. So,
I'll just finish this. So Pradosh, thank you. Very good question. 2 or 3 ways I can talk about it. The first thing is you brought up the practice and paper part of it. But the thing is, trouble is if there is that kind of a schism between what is there on paper, say the law is progressive and the practice is not, sooner or later practice will catch up with paper. So just think of what has happened in UP just now. Right? That in fact, this whole discourse of love jihad has now been given legal legitimacy in front of our eyes, and this it sort of completely resonates with laws that we know that Hitler was slowly passing in the 1930s, and it seems bizarre. It seems absolutely unbelievable to some of us, but the point is. Like Benjamin said, it's actually our problem because we as progressives imagined this could never happen. And it is happening because at the level of practice, we have continued to ignore it. It is bound to translate into the legal framework at some point or the other. It's just waiting to happen. All of this that we hear around us today. Right? So that's one thing. The second thing is when we talk about migration and labor in the international context, I'm coming to that question. Before that, there was something else that I want to talk about, which I didn't get time for, was Veena Das's work on abducted women. If you remember that where abducted women after the partition, right? What happened with this whole concept of this idea of legal repatriation? So Hindu women who had been sort of abducted and were now across the border, and Muslim women were actually sort of exchanged at the borders and returned to their families. Remember that this was this huge undertaking, and this has been reflected in literature in various sort of forms. About Amrita Pritam's Pinjar, Rajendra Bedi's Lajvanti. Again and again, this whole kind of this do-gooder progressive face of the state has, in fact, it's taken a long time for academic writing to catch up with that kind of critique. Those critiques have come much before in literature. So, but the point is, what Veena Das is actually asking is, how do you map consent in a situation such as this? So there were, in fact, women who refused to come back, right? Who said, I don't want to go. Right, who are now married to families that who concubines, in fact, married concubines, whatever you call it, in families where, who were considered infidels by their own villages and communities. They probably had been raped to start with, but they now had children who belonged here. They refused to be uprooted a second time. Right. Das's point is, how do you begin to map coercion and consent in a patriarchal heteronormative framework where women's consent anyway does not mean anything? How do we know that in her first marriage there was consent on her part? Was she even old enough to give consent? Was she raped on her first right of marriage? Was this simply another rape? The first rape would not count because that was marital rape, but this was action. So what were we really addressing? Were you addressing the woman's bodily integrity, her agency, her autonomy, or the fact that she had been taken from the community of which she was, in fact, property, a piece of property? So if really consent is a question, then you would have to go back to that first marriage and ask whether there was consent. Nobody was asking that. Right? The same argument that Latamani made vis-a-vis the question of sati, the fact that the whole argument about sati was really the women were neither the subject nor the object of that discourse. They were merely the ground on which a bigger battle on sort of, a certain kind of discourse, tradition and modernity in the colonial world was being fought. Were you good enough to have independence? How badly do you treat your women? So if you're not civilized enough to treat your women in a genteel fashion, then you do not deserve sovereignty, right? That went on till Catherine Mayo's Mother India, right? So that's the thing. About international labor and migration at the moment, the point is, Pradosh, I really don't know. I mean, you're probably more sort of clued in with these, these questions at the present moment and the international, sort of conventions, etc. But my question is that if a certain thing is already invisibilized, right? So the fact that women actually do work in their families and communities, and there is a huge lot of kind of sort of domestic labors, sort of reproductive labor that is already invisibilized in a society that we consider stable. In migrant communities, to raise that question would be 10 times more difficult. And the trouble is, if you cannot in normal conditions establish that domestic work is labor in a situation where a population is already migrant, where in fact women might be put to jobs that are not even considered work, right? I mean, forget about domestic labor. What if so many women travel for sex work with coercion, with consent, trafficked, not trafficked, they choose to stay on? How do we speak of this? Many women travel as hired domestic labor, and we've heard horror stories about how women have been treated. I mean, not far from, not even like, yeah, in Dubai, etc. Again and again, we hear of how terribly they're beaten up, and the perpetrators are not always the men of the house. So the trouble is, are we ready to ask the question about the middle class in Calcutta, let us say? Are we ready to ask the question about how we treat our domestic labor? Do we pay minimum wages? This autonomy that we speak about, of us women who are, who consider ourselves independent, sort of working women, is also dependent on the work of another class of women who maybe we sort of, structurally, consistently treat with less than justice, right? So my question is, you can ask the big questions, but that would also ethically require us to ask questions of ourselves. And the fact that what we consider home is in fact a place of work for women, other women. If we are not ready to encounter that question, then there is no point asking the big questions, because so it's really, frankly, related in a certain way. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about it later. Thanks.
Thank you. No, that gives a lot of perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinadi. I suppose Dr. Chetan has something to share with us. Chetan sir, I believe you raised your hand. Would you like to comment on this?
Sorry, no, I had a few things that I wanted to say, but I think Trina did actually say the things that I wanted to. A couple of just clarifications or points which I want. Am I audible? I just wanted to add to what Trina was saying. I think Trina mentioned two special incidents which I think need to be clarified, because this is in the light of the work that I have done myself. I recently, just yesterday, sent off this whole thing about the question of the recovery of abducted women and their consent. I wanted to add a little information for the benefit of the audience here, is that it's not really true, as Beena Das and many other feminist historians and anthropologists have argued, that the consent of women was not taken into account at all. There were at least two groups of social workers who were involved in the recovery of women during that period, 1947 to 1949. And one of the groups was led by Mridula Sarabhai, the other one was led by Rameshwari Nehru. The group that was led by Rameshwari Nehru made a very special point, like paid a lot of attention to the fact that we need to take into account the consent of women before we either recover them or let them be where they are. And there were several, these are documents which are still probably not all available in the public sphere, but there are several arguments that they make, and also what would at that point be called psychological analysis of the state of mind in which these women were. And this was done at the point when the nation was being presented as a kind of a community, or the Hindu nation and the Muslim nation, India and Pakistan. And I happen to have worked on the women members of the Constituent Assembly, many of them actually making this point that no matter what the religion, what the community of these women be, let them decide where they want to stay on. So that was definitely read, and this has to be read in the light of the longer narrative about the consent of women, right from the age of consent bill debates in the late 19th century up to the 1950s. That's something that I think is important for feminist politics to retrieve, because feminists, even at that point, had been aware of the question of consent, though, and I must acknowledge that the question of sexual violence, or what is nowadays very clearly called rape, was not. That word was not used, but that definitely was part of that discourse. The state obviously was patriarchal and took a position which is anti-feminist or did not agree with the feminists there. The second thing that I just thought, this is just a matter of clarification once again, the women's role in planned economy, the status of women committee, as you're saying, very interesting facts about that committee that I really thought would be nice to share here. One was that the committee was one of the several committees that the National Planning Committee had made. And we had a committee on, say, agricultural reform, a committee on industrialization, a committee on health and education, and one of them was the Women's Role in Planned Economic Committee, which was actually formed in 1938, and 39 was when it worked. 1947, actually, the committee's reports were published and were presented before the Constituent Assembly. And the Constituent Assembly took it into account because one of the authors of that particular document, Hansa Mehta, was also a member of the Indian Constituent Assembly and was a member of the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee. So that particular document and many of its, as Trina rightly said, many of its radical positions, which even now we are not in a position to take, and in both nationally and internationally, were actually accepted. And at least whether they were accepted or not, but they formed part of the Constituent Assembly debates. They formed part of what I would call the history of dissent in Indian constitutional or legal history. And the question of also recognizing, for example, the housewives' economic rights was taken up by these women later, though we do not have much evidence. But 1950s, the early part of 1950s, was not, as the standard historiography of feminism tells, was not actually totally a period of lull or a period of absence of these discourses. These are just some of the points that I wanted to make. What I really think very important. Yeah, sure.
Can I just interrupt you for once? My source for information for this report are two articles, one by Nirmala Banerjee and the other by Nirmala Book. Both were published in EPW in 1998. Where one was called Whatever Happened Dreams of Humanity, and the other was called Nehruvian and the Status of Women. And this is the reading that Banerjee gives of the that these radical suggestions were made in the mid to 30s, and they actually then disappear from the 5-year plans later. But if there is contesting evidence on this, if you could just point me to some specific stuff, that would be great. I would like to have a look at that.
Sure, you can look at. I mean, apart from the readings of this, there's a new book that has come. I'm forgetting, Annie Devenish. The book has come out from it came out just this year. A PhD work on the history of PIWC done at Oxford under Faisal Devji. It has actually dedicates almost half a chapter to this particular document. And even that does not, it talks about the document and its framing. Annie Devenish, I'll just write it down in the chat box. And the point that I really thought you were making could actually be developed further if you look at how this particular document compares or fares with regard to the radical suggestions made by the other committees. A good work on this has been done by Eleanor Newbegin, who reads this document vis-a-vis the other documents, say, for example, the one on agricultural reform or land reform that was undertaken by the same National Planning Committee. The Women's Role in Plan Economy Committee, the Committee for WRPE, took a very radical stand, whereas the land reform committee could not take those radical steps. Within the same party, within the same group of intellectuals, feminists were taking radical position, whereas the socialists were failing to take those radical positions. So I think there are a lot of what I would say subterranean forces of radicalism which were part of the 1930s, 40s, 50s debates, which we have forgotten, and we need to retrieve them in order to probably, galvanize more feminist energy. And that's all I.
Right. Thank you, Chetan sir.
Thank you so much. Big help, genuinely. Okay, yeah.
We have one question from the law school. Adhiraj Basu, are you here in the meeting? And would you like to address your question?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening to all of you. First, I'm so thankful and glad to be here. About my question, how should we acknowledge and distinguish rightful issues under feminism? For someone, the severe issues like personal judgments, mocking one's achievements, these are not results of lack of feminism but education, moral values, failure to understand human rights, and criminal mindset. For someone, feminism is about the rights, and for someone, it is a fight against oppression in general. World is getting old and submissive. When filled with such thoughts. In India, even for now, the struggle of a girl child commences even before she is conceived. And she is fortunate if she is allowed to unfold her life. So, how do you acknowledge the feminism issues which must be addressed in no time?
Right,
Niladri, okay, so Odhiraj, hello.
Yes, ma'am.
I genuinely understand your question. I know where you're coming from, but the thing is, the trouble is a lot of the things that we actually talk and write about and study when it comes down to everyday discourse, gets diluted or sometimes becomes the opposite of what it's meant to be. So the feminism is not meant to be for women. That's not the point. The point is that we're actually looking at a structure. The structure that we call patriarchy, which includes the roles that you and I and everybody else also plays. So therefore, if it sets a certain role, certain limits for women, it also sets similar roles and limits for men, right? And while there are, of course, hierarchies of oppression, historical sort of oppression that has probably affected some people more than others, women have faced a certain sort of structural and systemic violence in a way that men have not. It would be really blind of us to think that it does not, in fact, oppress and limit and make men suffer as well. Right? So somehow the question when we talk about gender, we don't automatically by default talk about women. We are talking about a particular system of norms that actually binds men differently, but perhaps in some cases equally viciously as it does women. So therefore, if there are ways in which you're expected to play a particular role within the family or in society where you might not wish to, and you feel forced by masculinity to play those roles, then that is also a feminist question. And you can and definitely pose that as a feminist question, and it would be absolutely legitimate. But Niladri is a person who works on masculinity, and so he should answer.
Yeah, I don't know what is the quality of the connection, because I seem to be experiencing a very, very erratic connection today after a very long time. So I may get again logged out in the middle of my answer. But no, of course, I'm in complete agreement with Tina, of course. And something that I have not mentioned in my discussion, which I initially had planned to, is the position of the trans person, which is something that I have absolutely not talked about. The position of the trans man, the position of the trans woman, and the way in which I constantly seem to be logged out, so I don't know at what state of intelligibility I am. But this is the point, isn't it? Is that there is a way in which even when sort of the law tends to make space for the trans person, the terms and conditions that law kind of imposes for the intelligibility of the trans person is also unconsciously patriarchal as well. So therefore, it isn't just about how men and women are oppressed. Those who do not identify either as men or as women, they are also oppressed in very, very sort of ingenious ways by the law. So yeah, it is pervasive the way in which this works. So thank you.
Right. Thank you. We seem to have come to an end of our question answer session. I would now like to request our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Tomoshi Vishash, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Medha. I think I'm audible. Good evening, everyone. I think if given a 10 minutes break, everybody would be ready with for another 2-hour session. I mean, everybody is on board for that, but I think we need to stop at some point. But I think we would love to have more and more sessions. Right, Medha? We would love to have.
Absolutely.
Of course, I would like to thank our father, Reverend Father Dr. John Felix Raj, with his constant encouragement, his wholehearted support. I mean, he's been there for every wherever there is a point of issues, wherever there is a need to support, he's there with us. I think no points, nothing to add much about it. But of course, I am a logical person from a maths background, so having a very little knowledge in English and literature. But I got time for 45 minutes. I could hear the session. And of course, I'm a big fan of Professor Niladri, sir. So thank you. This is the first time I heard the session from Dr. Trina. Ma'am, sir, thank you so much for your sharing your valuable observations. I mean, your thoughts with our students, and I think with all faculty members present here. I mean, thank you so much. We are extremely grateful. I mean, you could all take time from your busy schedule to address to our students and faculty members. On behalf of university, I would like to convey my gratitude to the organizing committee. I mean, they worked tirelessly to organize such an event, which continued till 2 hours, almost 2 hours, thanks to our Reverend Father Dr. Susai Nayagam, Dean of Arts and Social Studies, who has been there for his all guiding us in each and every step. And of course, thanks to Professor Indrani, Professor Paramita, Professor Monalika, these are respective members from our Women and Gender Development Cell, and of course, our very own dear Professor Vidha Bhadra Chaudhary. I mean, kudos to her, and I think we all agree with that part. I mean, without her, we could not have been here in this platform. So thank you, Medha. Thank you for this wonderful session. And of course, the final and but not the least, IT cell. Thanks to the IT cell, which worked tirelessly under the leadership of Mr. Maulan Mitra. Thank you for your technical support and your timely assistance. I think from my end, I think I should not add much to it, but thank you so much from IQAC. We would like to be part of this Women and Gender Development Center. We would like to be associated with more and more events. Over to you, Medha.
Thank you, Tonoshi. And I must thank our speakers, Dr. Niladri Chatterjee, Dr. Trina Banerjee. Thank you very much for giving us your time and for really entertaining us. This is not only sort of an educational sort of experience, which was thoroughly entertaining for our students. So thank you very much, and we shall end here for today. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks.